Hey, how's it going? This is Lemon Lattice, and today we're going to get started on a multi-part project. We're going to actually do full modifications on a BK limb. So transtibial limb from a cast poured with plaster, but no modifications were done yet. I just did some drawing on it, marked trim lines. So we're going to do full modifications, and then that'll lead us into creating a locking suspension test socket for use with a Bulldog 3 Gen A lock. And along the way, we're going to do some Fusion 360 work and get an introduction into that for making the housing for the lock. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. And we're going to get this aligned. So transform. And get that set up. I wanted to do full modifications on this one when a lot of times I will do some of that in the actual plaster. So a lot of times I will do my reductions and some general shaping in the plaster. And then I will bring that, scan it, and bring it into Meshmixer, which is what we're using here, only to do build-ups and smoothing. But we're aligned there, and now you can see how the distal end, the liner was not put on straight. So we actually need to fix the distal end of this before we can really use this model well. So this is something that can be done well in CAD that would be a lot harder to do by hand. So for that reason, we're going to work on the distal end first to get that corrected. And then we're going to move into just doing the full modifications. And because it's a test socket, we're going to see how that goes. We're going to try the test socket. And then we're going to start learning this actual process of doing modifications and everything here. So spacebar changes back and forth between the view. You can see I outlined the umbrella in red. So I want to keep that shape. That is part of the liner. That's not something we can really change. So I want to keep that. So number one is I'm going to start by selecting that area. And make sure you get out to the edge, because this next step will kind of blend things out. But whatever you've selected here won't be distorted at all. It'll just be repositioned. So we'll do that. And let's do a modify, create face group. Now you can only see that when you're in this view. Let's do an edit, duplicate. And now we've got two models that are the same thing. We can turn one off and keep one. And let's just, before we get too far, verify a few things. So analysis, units, dimensions. We can see we've got 303 millimeters tall, 160 by 123 on the X and Y. So this is a well-scaled model and we're ready to work with it. So what I want to do is select that end, do a deform, soft transform, and turn the fall off all the way down to 0. Turn the snap off. And you can grab that end and reposition just that umbrella. So what we basically have to do is figure out where this would be if that liner was donned properly so that we can set our test socket up in that position. So we're looking for what would be straight in line. That looks good from the side. That looks good from the front. We'll double check here. Go a little more. Now what we have to do is figure out where would this be positioned. So I'm going to turn on the old one to use as a reference. You can see I'm going to kind of rotate around that distal end and figure if this came around, then the back, the posterior section would probably move backwards a bit. We would probably end up with something like that, would be my guess. And that's really all it is at this point. It's my best guess. We're past the point of getting that cast in the right spot, so we just have to do what we can now. So I'll hit enter. You can see that blended in there, but that's not exactly the blending zone we want. So hit Control Z to get back to that screen, and then you can turn up that fall off and see how that blends up into those areas. And just pretty much pick a spot that looks right. So about 20 millimeters right there. I think that's pretty good. That's going to be our best guess on it. So we'll click back over. And you can see where we've ended up. Yeah, let's put this one, let's call this rebuilt distal end. We'll call this base model. And then we're going to save this. So we're going to work on the rebuilt distal end as our model. And let's start. Let's just stay down here at the bottom to begin with. And let's just clean up kind of that ridge right there. We'll do an edit, erase and fill, and just kind of blend that out to the sides. And that looks pretty good on the distal end. I don't think we really need to do anything else there right now. So let's start our actual modifications. Let's grab this pre-tib area. So lateral pre-tibial, we're going to do a little bit of compression there. I'm not going to go all the way to my line because that'll blend out as we do this. So again, soft, deform, or deform, soft, transform. You could do Shift T as your hotkey if you wanted to. And then we'll drop that down a little bit. Pick the depth that you want to carve that in. There's no actual guide to how deep that is. This is just kind of by feel, pretty much like it would be if you were modifying this by hand. And then you can blend that out. You can see now as we've blended that out, we reach the line I initially drew as where we could do our modifications. And let's do that same kind of thing on the medial side. Do something a little different here. So soft transform, and I'm actually going to twist this one. I'm not going to just drop it down. I'm actually going to pivot it around this axis. So by clicking shared frame, you can see we get a slightly different plane to work with. So we're going to turn that off. And I actually want to go further in here near the tibia. I want that to kind of blend to the outside on this model. We don't need to go much. Let's go just a little bit there, and that'll kind of wrap it in. And that'll be good. I don't want to blend too far because I don't want to get my distal end, my umbrella, messed up at all, so we'll stop right there. And sometimes it's easier to see what this looks like if you go to this different view. You can see we've got some slight compression there now. You can turn this one back on. And you don't see much. We didn't go too aggressive there. But if we go and click on that base model and do an edit, plane cut, you can get an idea of what would have been there just by what the shading and outlining is. If you hit that arrow, you can get a look at it from the top side and see that's basically the green is what the material we took off in our modifications. and cancel. We don't actually want to do that. So I just keep flipping back to this view. This is my guide. Let's do a little bit of a patella, kind of a patella outline. It's not really a patella bar. I'm not trying to dig in too much. I'm just trying to accentuate the shape of that, which I would normally in a cast use my thumbs and shape that in. So I'm going to do that digitally here. And same thing, it's going to be a soft transform. And we'll just take that in just a little bit. And the other areas that we're going to carve in will be the medial and lateral supracondylar. So we're going to get some tight ML control and stability there. So my blue line in the cast was where kind of the top end of the bone where it starts to flare in. So we'll use that as our guide. And we'll do another soft transform, turn off shared frames that we're working in. This green becomes the correct plane to work. What I want to do on this is not just compress, but I want to tilt also. So I want to kind of blend that better to the distal side and compress a little more on the proximal side. So we'll do that. Blend it in there. And let's do the same on the lateral. Go a little smaller on this one. And blend that out. So not a whole lot. It was a pretty well-defined cast, so we don't need to go too far on those. But that covers it for our areas of compression. We'll save that. Then let's start working on our build-ups. So let's go first here to the fib head. And let's make a relief for that. Kind of just general to start. And then I want to do a little more across the apex. There wasn't much showing for the bone there, but it was almost indented. So I want to make sure that we're going to have some space there. So I'm going to do a second one that's smaller, just to help build up the apex and give it some actual shape there to it. And then if we go back, we're on the base model. You can see what we did there. And this person's got a pretty prominent distal tibia. So I want to build sort of a channel, not so much anterior, but I want to build a distal area for that bone as they piston, being that this is a locking suspension. If their limb goes up and down, I want that tibia at the distal end to have a bit of a channel to follow there. So what I'm going to do is grab an area underneath here, and we'll deform and soft transform that, and just kind of pull that out in our way. And then we'll blend that out in a minute here. So you can see what we did there. As I do just more of a general distal tibia relief and blending here, I want to turn that base model back on. I'm actually going to switch to this view. So dark gray here is the base model. So as I blend this, hit escape, control Z to re-grab that with your ability to open up here. But as I blend this, I want to see the old model to make sure, Control Z, that I don't go too far on any of that. So you can see if we start to really blend, we're actually getting past the base model. And then I just experiment with which of these gives the best view. So I'm going to do that, and then actually I want to, now that I've blended it, I want to pull that out a little bit further because I can see that. Let's actually cancel. I'm going to grab a smaller area for this. Let's go right here. And then we'll do another deform and transform. Make sure right on that point of the distal tibia that we have enough space. So that should be pretty good there. Now if we look at that and see what kind of change we got, we have some anterior relief and some distal relief for that bone. And then this person also, actually let's look at that view again. You see they have a very prominent proximal tibia. You see how contoured that was in the cast. So knowing that that is very bony and prominent, I want to give just a little bit of relief on there too, which I marked out in red here on that model. And we're just going to pull that area out and blend it just a little bit. That should be good. And blend that in. So the only thing we were missing here is the distal fibula. We'll do just kind of a general. Let's actually back that off a little bit. So that was to go in and out. It's hold control and roll your mouse wheel, or also hold control and do left mouse click. Or right mouse click. And just move your mouse up and down. So we're going to go slightly smaller than my area there and do the same thing and just open that up a little bit and blend it out. All right, so when we turn this one back on, we should be able to see the areas of compression are going to be dark gray. And when we switch to the other view, we'll see now the dark grays areas that we've built up. So the last thing we need to do is a general volume reduction. So let's grab really the only remaining area, which is going to be some of the posterior. And I just want to make sure I stay clear of things that I don't want to have this touch at all. So like my posterior trim line, I don't want to compress in and close on that at all. So I'm going to stay well below it. And I don't want to get into the distal end, that umbrella, because we can't compress there. That is a set shape by the liner. And then I don't want to get into the fibular head or the end of the fibula, the distal end. I don't want to get into those reliefs at all. So we'll do our compression right there. And that'll blend into what we've already done on the medial pretibial area. And this again is going to be kind of just by feel. I don't know if this is a good amount or not. I haven't actually done one of these. This is my first time doing the CAD mods this way too, so we'll only figure that out by fitting this test socket and seeing how things go. But that is part of this whole process, is learning new ways to do it and what works and what doesn't. So I'll stop the blend by falling off just above the umbrella there. That also basically gets right to my trim line, so that creates a little bit of a flare there. So that'll be pretty good. I'm going to stop right there. And we'll look one more time. And you can see the amount we took off there. So save that again, do an edit, duplicate, and I'm going to make this last one my smoothed model. So I'm going to turn off the base model. I'm going to leave the rebuilt distal end model on while I do this. But I'm going to go to the smoothed model. And I'm not going to grab the green area. I don't want to smooth the umbrella. I just want to smooth the rest of it right now. Actually, what you just saw happen there was if you have both of these turned on and you try to select one, it's going to do that for whatever reason. So turn that one off while you select, and then you can turn it back on. Now you lost your ability to do anything here, so hit escape, Control Z. That's kind of the workaround so that you have that on and you can still use your menu. So do that, go smooth, and when we are down here at a 1, you can see we're barely smoothing anything. These are blended in and out of each other. So the orange and the dark gray are orange is smooth, dark gray is rebuilt distal end model. And as we go up, you can see we change quite a bit. So we don't want to completely blend out all those contours, but we want to get something that is a nice smooth model. So somewhere probably in about here, let's look at 10 on that smoothing scale. And that should be pretty good because we've already rebuilt a lot of this anyways by doing build-ups and compression. So we're going to blend out some of that, and that's okay. We've already created those shapes ourselves. So hit accept. And then let's turn that one off real quick and just see what that looks like by itself there. So you can still see the edges of the build-ups we did. Let's go Control Z until we get back into the smoothing. There we go. So I just want to look at just this without the base model on now, knowing that 10 is kind of a good level as far as not deforming the two models from each other too much. But now as we get up into like 40, you can see that really starts to blend things out. So let's do this. Let's stay back down here around 10. And then I'm going to just individually blend out some of these areas. So I'm basically taking any of the transition zone, selecting a little bit to each side of it, and then deform and smooth there. You can see what that does. So it's subtle. We'll go, let's go like 20 on that. You can see that now has a smoother transition there. Let's do all these at about 20. And I'm hitting escape to clear out that selection. On that fib head buildup, I'm going to go back to this view actually. I'm going to do just a big general area on that. And I'm going to unselect the apex of it. So let's actually do it this way. Let's work around the apex and then go from there. That way we're not smoothing that part out at all. We're not bringing that apex in tighter. And this last ridge that you can see here was actually from our scan. If we go back to this base model view, you can see our scan kind of stitched that together a little bit poorly there. So we're going to take that remaining ridge and individually smooth that. And up here on the patella, there was some of that still. And that is the one thing I really like about doing mods in a software like this, is you can just really just slide it around, and instead of having to put on material with plaster and take it off, you can actually just see what you're doing, and if you don't like it, you undo it and start over. So we'll save that. Let's just turn that one back on, see where we ended up. So pretty good. We haven't really changed the bulk of the model. We've just smoothed and blended in those transitions. And then we'll get to the distal end here. We're going to click that. Let's just experiment a little bit. So if we hit smooth here, see, we're going to really change the shape of that. And we don't want to do that. That is kind of set the way it is, and we don't have a whole lot of control over that. So we want to smooth it, but we don't want to deform it much. So going to 2 on the constraint rings seems to be better for that. It keeps it more kind of sloped, and 1's even further. It's more of an angular, more than a curved blend when you do it that way. So let's go to 2. And we'll go right there. And then one last one, I'm going to just finally grab this edge and see if we can do a little bit of a blend right there to clean that up. Just by itself, so that we can tightly control how that gets done. What I don't want to do is start pulling in too much there. All right, that's good. Let's verify by looking at the old one, and we're still pretty much right there. So that'll be my mods. And then the next step is we are going to start building the socket. So that'll be a second part here. One quick thing before we do go to that next part, I wanted to point out some things about smoothing. So I'm going to show you 2 things here. We're going to do edit duplicate on this already smoothed model. We're going to do that twice. And let's start with the first one. And let's select this and deform, smooth, and we're just going to go to a 10. And I just want to keep this as a reference of what that looks like. And then let's move to this next model. And I've talked about this in some of the other intro videos, but showing the wireframe. So when I brought this out of Scandi Pro, I decimated that mesh to about half its density before bringing it in. We still have 111,000 triangles. So it's still a pretty heavy, dense mesh. And you can kind of see the rings there, how they follow some of the contours of this model. So if we reshape this and remesh this before we do any smoothing, it has a big effect on how smooth that gets and how easily. So we'll do a sculpt, adaptive reduce. We'll go up here into the 80s on size, and we'll keep the strength down under 10. And if we just do this real quick and remesh this, now this will make it easier to work with. It'll be less intensive on your computer. So you may need to do this from that standpoint if you've got an older computer or struggling to keep up. And then we'll turn that back off. And I want to do the exact same thing. So I just want to do a 10 on this, and I'll show you the difference between these. So that's 1. You can see that really blends things out nicely. So that may be a better way to do the smoothing compared to that, which keeps some of those transitions. So that's a nicer model there. And let's actually look back at the base model, because that's really our comparison is where do we start with the base model, not these other smooth models. And you can see even there on the remeshed one that's more smoothed out, the light gray is areas where our current model is bigger, and dark gray is where our current model is smaller. So that's actually still what we want. We're compressed posterior on the medial and lateral pretibials. We're a little tightened in on the patella, which is probably fine, and then the supracondylar areas. And we're bigger across all the bony areas. So I'm actually going to use that as our model going forward because it's a cleaned up mesh, and that'll just be easier and nicer to work with. So we're actually going to use this one. Let's do this. Let's actually go this way, turn that on and off. You can see a nice clean view of our bony buildups there. This is the fibular head and the distal end of the fibula. That was the tibia. So let's do that. It still has exactly what we want. So let's actually work with that one going forward.